Welcome back, Warner fam. Today, I'm going to take you through the chilling 2007 horror mystery film Captivity. So, keep your eyes peeled and stay alert. The movie starts with a cold, twisted scene. A serial killer silently works on his victim. He knocks the man out with a needle, then smothers his head in plaster, leaving only his eyes and a few tiny openings for tubes. When the victim wakes up, it's too late. The killer pours acid into his throat, watching him struggle and choke on his own blood. The man's gasps for breath fade, and with a final hammer strike, the killer ends it. At the same time, a famous model shares her life story in interviews, revealing her childhood fears, secrets, and desires. Someone watches her every word, cutting out pictures from magazines and newspapers. After studying her for a while, the killer strikes. The model is kidnapped. She wakes up, confused and scared, lying on a cold bed in a strange, dark room. Outside the window, she sees palm trees swaying in the breeze. But as she steps closer, the truth hits her. It's not a real window, just a projection from an old film reel. The moment she realizes this, the image flickers and goes dark. Panicked, she stumbles back, her heart racing. She searches the room, desperate for an escape. Taking a deep breath, she demands answers, but the silence answers back. In a fit of fury, she starts destroying the room, throwing objects, screaming for help, and insisting she's a famous model. The police must be looking for her by now. But then, she hears something. The compartment opens again. Rushing to it, she grabs the key labeled locker number 1. Unlocking it, she finds her things inside. Horrified, she tosses them back into the compartment, the cold realization sinking in. A deafening noise suddenly erupts from the walls. The killer is not happy. Trembling with fear, she grabs her belongings and the noise stops. Shaking, she sits on the couch and starts looking through her things. Frustrated, she rips one of them apart. The moment she does, the terrifying sound comes back, louder than before. Panicking, she ducks under the bed, her hands shaking, and finds a nail file. Later, she uses the file to carefully unscrew the vent cover and squeezes herself into the duct. As she crawls through the dark, tight space, she hears something ahead, then a sharp, grinding noise. The sound of a saw spinning. Her body freezes in terror. Slowly, she starts to back away, but then she spots a camera staring directly at her. Her heart pounds. She has no idea what to do next. That's when, from the shadows above, gloved hands reach down. A sharp needle pricks her neck, and everything goes black. The model wakes up again, lying in bed, dressed in clothes she found in a locker. The vent shaft is sealed tight with a cold sheet of metal. Meanwhile, an unknown figure watches her every move through a maze of cameras and monitors. Hours later, she spots a tiny sliver of light creeping along the wall. She approaches it, and her heart races as she realizes it leads to another room. Suddenly, a pair of eyes appear, staring directly at her. It's a young man. The partition between them turns out to be glass, covered in black paint. He scratches something onto the glass, desperately asking, "Who are you?" A conversation sparks between them, and she learns that he too was taken. She begs him to help, but before he can answer, the lights suddenly go out. Thinking quickly, he strikes a match, casting a dim glow that reveals a small vent near the ceiling. Climbing up, they keep talking, and he hands her the matchbox, trying to comfort her in the pitch-black room. She confesses that she already tried to escape once, but it didn't work. Meanwhile, the maniac watches them closely from his monitors, as they start scraping away at the paint that covers the glass between their rooms. After what feels like forever, they finally clear a large enough section of glass to see each other clearly. They introduce themselves and quietly plan their next move, knowing time is running out. The young man asks how she ended up here, and she explains that someone slipped something into her drink at a party. He shares his own story in return, completely unaware that the maniac is listening to every word. Suddenly, the door to her room creaks open. The maniac steps inside and she freezes, her heart pounding in her chest. She has no idea what he wants, but instead of harming her, he simply walks around, studying the room. Then the TV flickers on, showing one of her interviews. The eerie sound fills the silence, adding to the tension. Moments later, a drawer snaps open. She rushes over, heart racing, and pulls it open to find a glass of sand, a card, and a box of matches. Reaching for the matches, she barely misses them. Before she can react, a hand grabs her from behind, pressing a cloth soaked in chemicals over her nose. She fights back, but the fumes overwhelm her, and darkness takes over once again. Lying in bed, she feels something cold trickle down from above. Sand starts pouring, filling the room slowly, and she realizes she's trapped. The sand rises inch by inch, and there's no way out. Desperately, she looks around, but every corner seems the same. Meanwhile, the kidnapper watches her every move on the cameras, enjoying her panic. Gary hears her screams echoing through the walls and rushes to help. He manages to slip into the space between the floors, the narrow passage barely enough for him to move. In a final attempt, Gary punches a hole through the ceiling and pulls her up. Breathing heavily, he calms her down and tells her to follow him. There's still a chance they can escape. They move quietly, carefully toward the exit, but the maniac notices their movements. Realizing they've been caught, the two slam the doors behind them and sprint for the garage, their only hope lying in the distance. Inside the garage, they spot a car. After a few failed tries, they finally manage to start it. With a roar of the engine, they ram through the gates, only to crash into a room where another car, covered with a white cloth, waits silently. The impact knocks Gary out cold, and gas starts pouring into the car from the vents. The girl's vision starts to fade as the gas takes hold. The next thing they know, they're back in their rooms. The kidnapper has them both under his control again and changes the model's clothes. When the girl wakes up, she notices she's wearing something new. She walks to the glass and sees Gary. With a sad look, she tells him they'll never escape, but Gary doesn't give up. He reassures her, telling her there's always a way out no matter what. At that moment, the kidnapper locks all the doors between them. A compartment opens in the wall, and the girl finds a key. She uses it to unlock a locker, revealing an evening gown inside. Feeling defeated, she changes into it. As soon as she does, the doors open, and she rushes into Gary's arms. But just then, a video on the TV starts playing. It's a girl being tortured. Gary begs her not to watch, but she can't look away. In frustration, Gary grabs a pipe and smashes the cameras built into the walls. The kidnapper, clearly enraged, cuts the lights, plunging the rooms into darkness. He moves toward them, armed with a weapon. In the silence of the dark, the girl hears the sounds of a struggle, a gunshot, and the horrible sound of a body being dragged away. Throughout it all, she pleads for Gary's life, her voice shaking with fear. A few minutes later, the TV flickers back on, showing Gary bound with a gun to his throat. Desperately, she begs again, her heart breaking, for his life to be spared. But the maniac isn't finished yet. He brings in the body of the second victim, and then the lights flicker on. Later, Gary lies in bed beside the girl. He whispers how attractive she is, and they kiss, eventually making love, unaware that the kidnapper is watching them, first through the cameras, and then in person, lurking just outside. When Gary wakes up, he tries to wake Jennifer, but she won't budge. After smelling the empty bottle beside her, he realizes the maniac must have drugged it. Leaving the girl behind, Gary heads to the bathroom, unaware of the startling transformation that awaits him. Afterward, Gary checks that Jennifer is still asleep and quietly slips out through a hidden side passage. He climbs up to the second floor, finding himself in the kitchen. He's surprised to see Ben there. He thought the maniac wouldn't show up until the morning. After a tense moment, Gary admits that he doesn't want to kill Jennifer, but Ben is firm. This game has to end on time. Realizing there's no other way to save the girl, Gary makes a horrible decision. He kills his brother, stabbing him with a knife. Dragging the lifeless body into the bathroom, Gary leaves it there, his hands trembling. As he flips through comic books showing the twisted fate of previous victims, he hears a knock at the door. When he answers, two police officers stand outside, asking for Benjamin Dexter. Gary tells them Ben isn't home, that he's just staying there temporarily. Gary can't get rid of the officers right away. They mention there's a game on TV and ask to check the score. He agrees, but he can feel his nerves starting to rise. During the commercial break, the officers switch the channel. They spot the surveillance camera showing Jennifer. That's when Gary sneaks up behind them with a gun and shoots both officers. Afterward, he wakes Jennifer up, telling her the kidnapper is dead and they can finally escape. As they head upstairs, she sees the two dead bodies. Gary tells her to stay in the room and not to touch anything. He leaves, and for a moment, everything feels still. But suddenly, one of the officers begins to stir. As he moves toward Jennifer, she freezes in fear, thinking he's coming to finish what he started. Grabbing a bat, she swings it hard, hitting the officer in the head again and again. He finally falls to the floor, motionless. When Gary returns, he comforts her, telling her everything will be okay. He suggests they leave and pretend none of this ever happened. She can just say she wasn't kidnapped, that she met a cool guy and had fun with him. Terrified by everything she's seen, she nods, agreeing to his plan. Gary promises it will only take him 20 minutes to get rid of all the evidence and asks her to wait for him. As she sits in the room, her eyes start to wander. Suddenly, she notices a stack of comic books with different girls' names on them. She opens one, and her heart drops when she realizes the truth. Gary isn't just a victim. He's a criminal, and he had been working with the kidnapper all along. In shock, she looks around, and then she sees him. Ben, alive despite his stab wound, watching her from the shadows. Ben attacks her, his hands tightening around her neck, trying to strangle her. But with all her strength, she grabs the knife and uses it to finish him off. Panicking, she looks around, desperate to find a way out. but all the doors and windows are locked tight and the glass is shatterproof. Just then, Gary walks in. He hands her a chemical to wash away the blood and asks her to help clean up. She nods, pretending to agree, but instead, she seizes the chance. She sprays the chemical straight into his eyes, blinding him, and runs for her life. She races toward the basement, searching for another way to escape. Gary is right behind her, realizing she knows everything now. Hiding behind a wall, Jennifer spots a gun lying on the floor. She grabs it and uses the lights to trick him, firing several shots at Gary. As he falls, he tells her she managed to escape her prison, something he could never do. Jennifer shoots out the locks on the doors and steps outside, finally free. She walks away from the house, the nightmare behind her. Do you think Jennifer will ever truly be free from the horrors she faced? Or will the memories continue to haunt her? Let me know what you think in the comments. So if you liked this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more recaps. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Warner Movie Recaps.